The mic has died. But anyway, there was a young lady that came on and she was just talking about rest, and how we need rest. And she was talking about, how we try to find things to fulfill ourselves. And when I think about that God-sized hole in our hearts, for fulfillment, that God-sized hole that nothing on this earth could ever fulfill, I'm deeply saddened by, how 50% of our days are spent working. When I, learning about retirement, right, looking into retirement, researching retirement, and just kind of seeing how that's increasing, right? I think the thing that saddens me the most about our endless escapism, which I don't think it's due to a lack of intelligence. And there was a point in time where I thought that our escapism was due to a lack of intelligence. I thought that we were seeking to escape from reality and our overconsumption of social media and all these different things. I thought it was due to, us simply being people who, let me see here, just get a filter going. But I thought it was due to us, being people who, just lacked intelligence. We just wanted to learn. We wanted to, kind of be in a space where we were deferred from the things that really mattered. But I just think that at this point it's serving merely as a distraction. I talk about this a lot, and not from a cynical perspective, but more so as someone who is a social justice advocate. We're living in some really difficult times. I think if you are someone and you can afford rent and you can afford food, which most people can't, then you're doing amazing. And when you start talking about economic opportunities, right? Because this video, just y'all know how we do. We just get on and we share our thoughts. When you start thinking about different economic opportunities and what that looks like as it pertains to the internet, as it pertains to technological advancements, right? Influencer work, content creation, all these different things. It no longer serves as work that's inspiring, right? It more so serves as tokenism, and it serves as consumerism, and it's not inspiring. But it more so, I think it more so just kind of showcases the truth of just like, man, who can afford to live these type of lifestyles? And when you think about the work of influencing, the work of being a content creator, a lot of times there's this projection to make yourself out to be something that you're not, because otherwise people wouldn't follow you. You know what I mean? If you don't showcase that you have these things. And so I was thinking about work, and I was thinking about fulfillment, and just like I said, how 50% of that a lot of times is solely based on the work that we do and whether or not our skills are being utilized. I think to spend 50% of your life and time, right? We talk about 100% at work. That's huge. And sometimes it makes me question this idea of fulfillment and American dream and all these different things. It makes you question: is it real? Is it changing? Right? What does that look like? A lot of companies will, try to push for work-life balance, but I don't think it's anything that they actually fulfill. I don't think it's anything that they actually seek to obtain and sustain. And it just kind of seems like as this wealth gap gets wider, those who are workers, service workers, and not just fast food restaurants, but people who are just workers in general, are having to work a lot harder for less. I was reading, and a lot of people have been talking about this. I've seen this online. A little over 60%, around 60% of Americans, you know what I mean? 70% of our income goes towards housing. And I think in all the ways in which we can talk about merit and all the ways we can talk about work ethic and all these different things, we have to really sit here and realize that like there has been a huge closing of windows of opportunity, right? Those windows have gotten a lot higher over the last couple of years. And it doesn't mean that it's impossible, but I do think we should really take a look at that and kind of see, what is going on here? And I think the only reason why people are not having more conversations about this is because, again, social media in the form of escapism, right? When you see more African Americans, more minorities online, and they're doing the content creation, right? They're a luxury, black girl luxury, they're content creators, all these different people, you start to think that, oh, the world is getting better. Oh, look, black people are doing this. Oh, look, minorities are doing this, right? Oh, look, inequality is something that doesn't exist anymore, right? You start to kind of have these fairy tale like fantasies, right? Because TV is no longer a thing that's far away from you. It's in close proxy, and it's something that's with you every day. So these images are kind of creating this idea that like life is this beautiful fairy tale, and that there's endless opportunities and it's all these different things, when that's not true. And I think because we are at this point overdosing on these images, on these fairy tale like ideals, about media and life and, you know, what's possible for us. I think that cognitive dissonance and that distortion between our realities is what's causing a lot of people to go off the hinges. I think that the mental health crisis in America is a little bit more than, you know, our food, right? The pesticides, the toxins in our food. I think it's a little bit more than just media per se, but I think it's a cognitive dissonance that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? And I don't think that there's a lot of study there. We know that when we talk about sociology, especially as it relates to different cultures, right? You know what I mean? There's a lack of research there. There's a lack of funding for research, especially as it pertains to African Americans and African American cultures. So I just think where we are today, there's a lack of fulfillment. I think the jadedness, I think the recklessness of our youth, and so many people, right? The drug consumption and all these different things, right? Alcohol consumption, rather. I think it's due to many things outside of, you know, the superficial things that we can see. And so when you start talking about fulfillment, you know, that fulfillment comes from God. And we start talking about purpose and possibility and all these different things, and you start talking about poverty, that's really tough, you know? And to say this from a Christian's perspective, you know, for me, I don't think that I would ever use wealth as a means of a motivator, right? Me personally, I believe in inspiration. I believe that in order to, you know, bask in nice things and have, you know, an abundance of nice things or whatever the case may be, I think it's a luxury, it's a comfort, right? And I think that that's something that I do believe that God wants to give us as Christians, you know, like I'm not here for just living this very much like minuscule, mediocre life per se, but I think where the message gets lost is a lot of people use materialism as a means of a motivator. And I think that is not the intention of it. I don't think that should be the vessel, because it's very fleeting and you can never have enough of it. You know, you can never have enough of it. Your car's going to get old, right? There's depreciation of things. And, you know, it can't be something that sustains you. But I think it's a nice vehicle. You know what I mean? And I think what's unfortunate today is that because we are so shallow, because our minds are so shallow, because our minds no longer find dopamine in little things, right? We can read the articles, we can, you know what I mean, read the blogs, we can go to therapy, we can read all the books, and we can listen to the psychologists, and, you know, some of those, you know, very like earthy people, you know, on Instagram and on YouTube. But I think when we really sit, you know, and be honest with ourselves, those things no longer, it's almost like a struggle, it's a battle to find fulfillment in those things, because, well, our brains have kind of been conditioned to find fulfillment in the things that we can see, in the tangible. So what I'm talking about here is it's really hefty. I've hit on a lot of different points, and you know, just stay with me throughout this video. But you really have to kind of understand what's happening here psychologically. My dad called me yesterday and was asking me, you know, how do I, you know, focus on reading a book without being distracted? And I said, well, what we have to realize is that there's been a hijacking of our minds. I think what we don't realize in the significance of American culture and American society, the colonization, the theft, the bribery, right? We don't realize that we have been consumed by convenience. And so a lot of times, everything that we're going through, right, attention deficits and all these different things, you have to understand that this is all happening outside of our control, right? We are merely control experiments, I guess you could say, you know what I mean? And I think that the magnitude of that is a little too heavy for a lot of people to really grasp and sit with. One, because of the lack of language concerning what is happening in our country. Two, I think because of the primal conditioning just continuously that states that we are the best country, right? We have all the resources, we have everything that we need, you know what I mean? And so I just think that when you're conditioned your entire life to not really look at your country and see, okay, look, you know, what goes on here? What are we really doing? What are we, you know what I mean? There's nothing you can do there. And then you start also considering positions of power. You start considering who has power, you know? I think that in all the ways that marches and protests used to work in the past, because, well, I would say that those methods of strategizing as citizens, it worked in the past because there wasn't social media. There was more bandwidth, there was more passion, more power, more unity in that, you know? And today, a lot of these methods that people are using to communicate and to do things are no longer effective, because we're no longer living in a time where you have to go out and, you know, voice your opinion. I also think when you talk about diversification, you talk about the controlling of algorithms. You start talking about critical theory. You start talking about analysis, intelligence, and all these different things. That's something that you really have to go out and seek. You know, that's not something that's praised in college. I know for me, being in college, it was about specialized knowledge, right? If you were to bring any knowledge or any insight, any wisdom, any intelligence, any form of intelligence outside of what is in the textbook, that would be considered wrong. So, in a lot of ways, we've kind of been conditioned to not think about things critically, to not think about things at all, quite frankly. And when you compile that with the fact that rent is due, I have to go to work, you know what I mean? Where do we really have time to sit and think and conceptualize, especially as those who are minorities and who are African Americans? So I just think when you start talking about fulfillment, we start talking about the sense of jadedness in the eyes of so many Americans, right? We're tired. We are truly tired. There was an article, I think it was NPR or either Entrepreneur this morning, where they just kind of talked about how, you know, the 911 call centers are, you know, understaffed and the work is getting harder, right? The work is getting tedious. The work is becoming more laborious. And I found that to be true with every place of employment, right? A lot of employers are really cracking down. These large corporations are working, you know, their clients more and more because people are becoming more and more demanding. I think this sense of demand, you know, when we start talking about the human condition, again, I'm going back to psychological, and more so, you know, psychological, but also kind of like not ancestral. I guess you could say ancestral if you want to talk about God being our creator, because I did hit on that in the first part of this video. But I more so mean, you know, not ancestral. I don't want to say ancestral, but I just think about the human condition, right? I think that we're starting to be resourceful to find ways to get those needs met. And it's a really huge hole in us, and because the things that we used to find joy in, right, the parks, the little things are no longer enjoyable, right? There's a lot of difficulty in that. And when I think about the people who are in positions of power, who may have a little bit more authority in terms of controlling that narrative, these are privileged groups. So yeah, they may actually be able to enjoy a walk in the park without worrying about the stressors of life and bills being due, right? There was an article that was talking about temporary work being the new norm, contractual work being the new norm, right? And so there's a lot there, right? Articles about college graduates, you know, not being able to find jobs. You know, you have people who literally have debt who took a chance and they're no longer being paid. You know, they're not even being compensated regardless of the work. You start talking about, you know, in-house and lineage and legacy referrals and so forth. Like, there is a huge, and I talked about this in my column. I said, I think that what's happening is that there's a window of opportunity and it's closing. Now, I did kind of highlight how that was closing in regards to minorities. I said, okay, after the PPP loans, and, you know, we're not talking about those who were scammers, but after the PPP loans and after the pandemic, you know, businesses began to fail, right? The funding was no longer coming in. People were, you know what I mean? There were some changes that happened. We had like a slight boom, a slight economical shift, where we really started to see economic growth in Black businesses, and that's where we have the support Black businesses and women owned and all these different things, right? And then there was a slight decline, right? There was a window of opportunity, and then there was a slight decline. And I don't think that we need to necessarily study economics to kind of just see that. I think if you just kind of look around and just kind of see what happened there and that boom, then you'll evidently see where there was an increase and then there was a decline. And it wasn't by the market, right? Because there was still a demand for those businesses. But there was a decline there. And so now here we are, and it's like the wealth gap is getting, you know, wider and wider, but a lot of people are working harder and it's less money, you know. So yeah, when I think about fulfillment, I think that that's probably one of the biggest things. And, you know, back to what I was saying about hierarchies, long held hierarchies, right? Deeply ingrained stereotypes about who's able to be a leader, who does, you know, who has to work for it, who deserves it, and so forth. You have all of that, right? And you just think about how unfulfilling that is. You know, I think to be at a space where you spend majority of your time and your skills are underutilized, your creativity is underutilized, You're put into environments with people who are not like-minded. You're put into environments with people who aren't creative, like myself, people who may not be intellectuals, people who may not even appreciate that, and it's a really sad thing. And I think to do that for your entire life, and to do that to simply pay bills, that's a very interesting thing. And I think probably one of the biggest lies concerning all of it is that we don't try hard enough, right? We don't work hard enough. We don't try hard enough. I think that's probably one of the biggest myths, because it's not true. It's not true. But I think to be able to fathom the inequality and the realism that is, American employment is difficult. I think that's very, very difficult. And when you have this myth of the self-made person, right? You start to, reach for the stars, and you believe that it's possible, and you have these very unrealistic expectations. And there's, America will give you the dream, but she's not there to catch you when you fall, and because life is a little bit more complicated than that, right? I just don't think that there's a safety net to catch us when we go all out. And I think a lot of people are dealing with that grief, with the resurfacing of social media, the obsession of youth culture, and just kind of the realism of well, not the realism, but the cognitive dissonance between our realities and our virtual realities that we see every single day. That's tough. I believe that it takes a lot of courage to dream with your eyes wide open. I believe that it takes a lot of courage to see the world for what it is and to carve your path within that. I think creating a distraction, creating a utopia, right? I think that actually makes people a lot less resilient, and I think conversations such as this sound too cynical, because, people want to dream. They kind of want to stay in that fantasy-like state. And so where do we go from here? Where do we go from here when there's disconnect, right? How can we think about reform and change as it pertains to, the things that we want to see change in our society? How can we even really sit and think about those things when we're all on a different page and everybody's experiencing a different reality? And I think one of the coolest things about social media was us all being privy to different cultures, right? As we know, with cultural appropriation. I can't even believe the New York Times put out that article about Travis Kelce. It really kind of seemed like clickbait. I think a lot of times they do certain things to just kind of ruffle the feathers of, people. I didn't really care, but I thought that the cultural ignorance was very interesting. But nonetheless, when you consider that, right, you talk about being privy to other cultures. I think one thing that really hit home for me was just the inequality, right? When I was on TikTok, I said, oh my God, these are the houses that people live in. Like, this is crazy, and you don't realize that. I mean, you drive by these neighborhoods, you drive by these communities, but you never really step back and realize the fact that it's real. And I think for a lot of people, it's just easier just to ignore it, right? I'm actually reading this book. It's really good. It talks about overcoming life's disappointments, which is very timely, right? I think there's something in being in your 20s and getting a little bit older where you start to kind of realize, like, oh, you know what I mean? And then it's not a lack of dreaming, but it's more so, okay, planning. And then life happens, and it doesn't always happen the way in which we plan. Sometimes, I mean, quite frankly, I think it turns out better. But I do believe that there's question marks in between that, right? When you think about the famous poem, right, by Langston Hughes, Harlem, right? What happens to the dream deferred? Because we all have dreams. And I think it's easier to just think, oh, this person didn't try. This person, you know what I mean? When we don't really unpack the complexities of that. But I think this book is very interesting. It really references Moses and Moses' life. But I think one thing that really stuck out to me, let me see here, because I just marked it. So far, a great book. One thing about me, I believe in therapy. I really do. But I've always had some of the greatest revelations just through my own learning, through my own reading, and just, that's been my thing. I absolutely love it, So I'm not someone who's too dependent on therapy. Not saying you shouldn't go to therapy. I think counseling is significantly important. I believe that what counseling had did for me was create a safe space. And it's not that people aren't safe. And it's not that you should be distrustful, although you should be discerning. I just think that there is a level of self-awareness that sometimes comes from, dealing with a professional who's into psychology, right? Not everybody has a desire to sit around and read books. Not everybody has the time, right? I always say that I think being in the work of, philosophy, especially as it pertains to African Americans, a lot of times we're not in these spaces, but a lot of times it's because we've been relegated to be the laborers and not the thinkers, right? So even though we've existed in these spaces, and even though we exist right now, we're not really afforded, the opportunity to even be depicted as such. So it's difficult. It's a little bit more complex. But there's this quote. It says here that God is with a person who speaks out against injustice and exploitation. And I think one of the things that really concerns me, and I follow someone on Twitter, and he's just kind of been talking a lot about how a lot of people have been using the Bible to justify racial injustice and inequality. And I think it's so funny, and I always will go back to James Cone quote about oppression in the Bible. And just to paraphrase, he talks about, theology has always been about the liberation of those who are oppressed. And anybody who is not doing that work is doing the work of Antichrist. Now, that was me paraphrasing, but I thought that was very significant because it does seem as though today, especially as it pertains to the Bible, and there's all these different versions of the Bible, a lot of people are in a space today where they're justifying that, and they're being silenced in regards to it. And I will say that I think dealing with racial inequality and injustice as it pertains to the Bible, and just being a believer and being a Christian, I think that it takes a level of anointing. I'll say that. And I think that it takes a level of pruning and guidance, because I do think that we want to speak the truth in love, but yeah. So on the second page, I thought this was very, it just really connected the dots between slavery and where we are today. And I think this is probably one of the most unfortunate things about us being on this continuous hamster wheel of survival within our country, is because we don't really get the time to really sit and think and to study, right? We go to college and we're, dang near milked to death from all the busy work, right? All the busy work from all the, study guides and the definitions and just all this really busy work, because that's really all it is. It's just busy work, that we don't really have the time to really sit and think and conceptualize. And so we're really left, at the hands of other people's leadership, at the hands of, and I think this is why a lot of Christians are so big on church. Me personally, I think that you need to have your own relationship outside of church, with the Father. But I think most importantly, now more than ever. So let that be your warning, because quite frankly, we're living in a very interesting time. I talked about how this was the year of prophecy, but I mean, to see the numerous prophetic words, but not ever really have any general understanding about like what's going on spiritually. All it's just, it's very unfortunate. It's leading a lot of people astray. But anyway, so this is on the different page, but it says here that I have long suspected that this plague was more psychological than a meteorological meteorological darkness, that the Egyptians were emotionally battered by plague after plague, and maybe even having to comfort their guilt about living comfortably in a society based on the exploitation of an oppressed minority. We were out yesterday, and I just was looking at, I'm always observing people. And I think that there's really something said about, people who literally have never had to experience struggle. I think there's really something said about being someone who has in the presence, and, forever surrounded around people who have not, right? And I think this is so complex because I think a lot of people like to kind of paint this idea of victimization, right? They like to paint this idea of like, oh, well, you need to just work harder, which we know that that's not the case per se. But I think one of the things that I find most interesting about those who are privileged in society is that they actually create environments and for themselves where they actually don't have to deal with people who are less than, right? They don't actually have to be confronted by those who are oppressed, right? They don't have to look at you every day, right? They can actually go and exist in communities, gated communities, and so forth, where they actually don't have to deal with that guilt and deal with that sorrow. And I think that's very interesting. But I shared that quote from this book, paraphrasing, but shared that from this book because I just thought that that was very timely, especially as it pertains to just everything I was saying and in society. And I think it's very interesting how in so many ways the Bible just kind of shines a light on what we're dealing with in modern day, and all the similarities there. So theologians probably aren't going to tell you that. I think it's very interesting that, Moses was depicted as a white man in the Netflix series. And I do think at this point, this, depiction is growing very tiresome. I think the depiction of, yeah, it's growing very tiresome, quite frankly. And I think that that's also the thing that really gives rise to a lack of unity, right? It's kind of like this um, false sense of humility, false sense of righteousness, false sense of um, just unity. You know, it's like you're still telling lies. You're still telling lies about everything. And so do I think it's intentional? Absolutely. Because why couldn't Moses be a black man? Why couldn't he be an Egyptian man? Why couldn't he be, you know what I mean? But I think to continuously go above and beyond, to constantly push the narrative that, of this fairer skin, as it pertains to, biblical times and days, is just very unfortunate. And so when you start thinking about unity, how will we ever bridge that gap when there's all this inequality in the world? How will we ever bridge that gap and actually be able to come together when there's a perpetual there's just continuation of lies? How will we ever really come together in that sense? I think one of the things that I would say is probably most unfortunate is that across the board, no matter what, the standard of success will always be materialism. I've even had and this is no judgment. I just, like I said, this is just the standard of success. This is what it is, and I'm not saying that I'm not, we're all in this, right? In this piece here, we're all in this together. We're all victims to the realism that it's materialism. But I think it's very unfortunate because, you have people who are scholars and who, black scholars, and they're just, all these great things. It's like that still is the prize token. It's the materialism. So I don't know, where do we go from there? I think even in our conversations about everything we talked about today on this live, snippets here, snippet there. Hope you caught some of the parables, you know what I mean? But it's like, I think regardless, when that is the standard of success, materialism is our standard of success, I don't think that there will be room for intellectualism, right? Entertainment is what is reigning, right? I did a short where it was kind of like a subtlety, but I talked about, just the tiresome concerted effort that we put into celebrities and fandom, and how this is starting to be like a lack of intelligence. Is belief that one person is the representative for all of us is exhausting, right? When we talk about Beyonce and the rise of the cowboy and all these different things, I mean, these black cowboys have existed long before Beyonce decided to create this new, let me think. I'm sorry. It's existed just long before it, she decided to make a song and kind of venture into this new genre for her own relevancy, and I just think that the continuation of a person, day in day, I don't know how that could ever really be inspiring to you. This person works just as much as you. Where's the inspiration in that? And in what way does one person who shines a light on something at their own benefit, right? Like, because cowboys have been going through, nobody's been talking about, the murdering of their animals. Nobody's been talking about the burning of their land. No one's been talking about the ceasing of their land, right? Nobody's talking about any of those things. There's not been any funding sent out for these cowboys, and they've existed long before, Beyonce decides to venture into this genre, again, for her own benefit, for her continuation and extenuation of her career and so forth, right? So I don't know. I just think it's getting kind of exhaustive, quite frankly. I think what starts to bother me, and I think so many other people who are kind of like debunking celebrity culture, is, you just kind of realize that a lot of people, regardless of race, regardless of where we are, a lot of people profit off the backs of people who are really living it and really struggling and really doing that work and really fighting on the front lines. You know what I mean? So, it's like, it's like taking someone's script. You know what I mean? And yeah, thanks for shining a light on that, but it's still my story. It's still my script. It's still my, And I think in our obsession with celebrity culture, we tend to overlook those things. We tend to overlook that. And I think that that's very unfortunate. I think that's very unfortunate. So, I don't know. I think in all the ways in which, we talk about, we have this person who's the representative and they're successful and they're doing all these things and they're breaking all these records, but it's for their own selfish benefit. It's not for you. There isn't money going out to these black ranchers. There isn't money going out to these black farmers who are, struggling to maybe whatever the case may be. And it may not even just be profit, but it's like, where is their recognition? Where is her, sending out? I mean, hey, listen, when you have resources, you can do whatever. You know what I mean? But where is the shining light for the community? Right? It's like, oh no, I'm going to take all the light. I'm going to take all the glory. I'm going to take this story, and you guys will just figure it out. You know what I mean? So it's like, when do we kind of grow out of that? When do we kind of get to a point where we're like, you know what, I'm actually not going to keep supporting artists and people who just take from our community, even if it is, you know what I mean, Beyonce. Like, when are we going to get to that point, So I think that that's something that's very unfortunate. And I think with our continual support, I think with our continual fandom, that'll never change. We'll always be people who are exploited, because we're so, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but I just think for me it's exhaustive, it's truly exhaustive. And there are so many people who are in those spaces who don't make a certain amount of money, So when I talk about this, right, the debunking of celebrityism, when I talk about the debunking of Hollywood, it's not to say don't strive. It's just more so to say, what is your standard of success? And I think it's time that we reevaluate that, because the truth is that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? And it's not, wealthy people being evil. That's not the narrative that I'm rolling with. I'm just more so rolling with the realism that work is work, and there's many other ways to obtain a really nice life for yourself that doesn't necessarily result in you sitting with the elites in the top 1% of those who have wealth, who, gain that wealth by profiting from others and exploiting others. That's not her story. And there are a lot of cowboys who are literally ranches underfunded, fighting all different types of lawsuits, gentrification, all these different things. And there's no light shed on these ranchers. You don't think that this person has the ability and like the opportunity to go out and actually meet with these ranchers and share their information, right? Who comes to mind is Keith Lee, right? Taking the time, going to Black, you know what I mean? So it's just like, decide who you're gonna support. That's all I'm saying. And, realize like what you're fighting against here. This person does not need defending. Actually, this is exploitation. Quite frankly, this is considered exploitation. But I've been on here for 32 minutes, and I don't know, I just think it's time that we just kind of grow out of that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just too much going on in the world. It's a really sad thing outside of youth, but, just to kind of hit on youth. A lot of children are going hungry, right? Food is incredibly expensive. There's a lot of different things that I think we could shed light on, you know what I mean, that we need to honestly shed light on, and that we're not doing. And so I think when you start talking about the complexities of social justice, you start talking about the complexities of representation as it pertains to Black people, look around you, because that's your reality, right? Not Beyonce, not anybody online, not any celebrity, you know what I mean? And I think that this is where we miss it on the mark, right? I think too often we think that our communities are online. Our reality is online. This person did it, and then we all can do it. No, this is your reality. Look around you. This is real. This is what's real. You know what I mean? And I just think that we're not aware of this cognitive dissonance. And I think it's time to kind of grow out of fandom, because it's harmful. It's truly, truly harmful. And, we have to set new standards of success and ideals. Like, because seriously, seriously, like, we're really tired, right? We're tired. The extent that people will go, right? There was a teacher, literally, I know teaching is not anything that's considered noble, but, a teacher, decided to, hey, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to be a rapper. I'm going to get this fast money, and we can talk about lack of character. We can talk about lack of moral. We can talk about all those things, but this is the reality for our communities. So I don't know, you guys. I just think it's time that we kind of at least take heed, because it's getting pretty bad out here. It's not just poverty. It's not just lack. It's not just, a lack of nutrition, but it's psychological. And it's really, really detrimental. And I feel like I have to come on and share my thoughts about certain things, because I just don't think we know any better. We're not doing better. It's not looking good. It's not looking good. So, yeah. So there you have it. I think we talked about fulfillment today. We talked about just, work and, where we are as an American society. We start talking about, what does that mean to us anymore, right? What does it even mean? We start talking about, the commonality of celebrityism, the commonality of Hollywood, and how even that no longer even feels aspirational, right? It seems to be a very low barrier to entry. But we talked about the realism, right? We talked about, lack of nutrition. We talked about poverty. We talked about inequality. We talked about racism as it pertains to the Bible. Okay. We talked about celebrity culture. I think I said that already. Debunking celebrity culture. And so, yeah, these are just my thoughts. Just coming on to share some things. I think we have a long way to go, but I think we can just kind of get on the same page, and not necessarily in a sense of shared ideals, but more so just kind of realizing, like, hey, listen, we got a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, and it's time that we kind of wake up. So I think that's that. I don't think anyone came on with chats. I think I did set the chat on. Oh, yeah, the chat is definitely on. Live chat. Yeah. So, all right, guys, I'm going to go. Have a great day.